This is one of the reasons why I don't think we hate the corporate press enough. Hey there, friends, fans, and foes of Dad Saves America. John Popola here. And like you, I am trying to keep up with the insane flurry of activity happening in our government with President Trump and Elon Musk and the flurry of executive orders and the incredible revelations of the Department of Government Accountability, or DOGE. And so I thought I would take this time to dive in and try my best to understand where the critics of President Trump may have a legitimate point versus maybe blowing smoke and selectively applying outrage that really we could have used for the past 4 years and beyond. But let's start with one of the stranger Oval Office press conference moments in modern memory, shall we?
We're going to be signing a very important deal today. It's DOGE, and I'm going to ask Elon to tell you a little bit about it and some of the things that we found, which are shocking. Billions and billions of dollars in waste, fraud, and abuse. And I think it's very important. And that's one of the reasons I got elected. I say we're going to do that. Nobody had any idea it was that bad, that sick, and that corrupt. And it seems hard to believe that judges want to try and stop us from looking for corruption, especially when we found hundreds of millions of dollars worth, much more than that, in just a short period of time. And we want to weed out the corruption. Elon, go ahead.
Sure. So at a high level, if you say what is the goal of DOGE, and I think a significant part of the presidency is to restore democracy. This may seem like, well, aren't we in a democracy? Well, if you don't have a feedback loop, okay, we would have to, if you it's all right. So, tell you, gravitas can be difficult sometimes.
So one thing that I want to point out before we keep going, because the rest of the clip is good and worth hearing, but number one, if President Trump is the next Hitler, it's pretty weird to have a Hitler-like character sit and let this take place and hand the mic to anyone else to take the center stage. That, from a authoritarian strongman personalities profiling, I would not say that this is exactly what you would expect to see. That's number one. Number two, it is weird, and maybe little X, or however his name is spelled, should be with a babysitter off camera for this impromptu press conference. But this is Dad Saves America after all. And I happen to think personally that this is great. This is the kind of Zoom call where your kids sort of bomb on the conference call at a grand national scale. Well, it's encouraging all of us to have our kids be part of our lives. And I like that. I think that's great. Elon's interesting configuration of family notwithstanding.
If there's not a good feedback loop from the people to the government, and if you have rule of the bureaucrat, or if the bureaucracy is in charge, and then what meaning does democracy actually have? If the people cannot vote and have their will be decided by their elected representatives in the form of the president and the Senate and the House, then we don't live in a democracy. We live in a bureaucracy. This is not to say that there are good people who are in the federal bureaucracy, but you can't have an autonomous federal bureaucracy. You have to have one that is responsive to the people. That's the whole point of a democracy.
And one thing I'll say about this is I think this is definitionally true. I think the entire purpose of having voting and democratic processes in government at all is so the government doesn't just go off the rails into something like autocracy or dictatorship or a ruling cabal, but that the public can in some way hold the government to account for its actions. That's the way I understand the role of democracy in this republic. We are not a democracy. We are a republic. We are a constitutional republic. But regardless, yes, we the people as voters should be able to hold our government accountable, to redress our grievances with the state, and to elect presidents to work on behalf of the public at large.
And so And if you looked at this, if you looked at the founders today and said, what do you think of the way things have turned out? Well, we have this unelected, fourth unconstitutional branch of government, which is the bureaucracy, which has, in a lot of ways, currently more power than any elected representative. And this is not something that people want, and it's not. It does not match the will of the people. So it's just something we've got to fix. And we've also got to address the deficit. So we've got a $2 trillion deficit. And if we don't do something about this deficit, the country's going bankrupt.
So I love all that. I want the government to be smaller. I want it to be more accountable. I welcome this. I welcome the transparency. This is good. And even if you're a progressive and you want government to do more things than I personally want the government to do, you should also want the government to be more efficient, faithfully executing the laws. Rooting out where they're poorly executed is surely part of that constitutional duty of the president to faithfully execute the laws passed by Congress. Not all of our elite institutions seem to agree, or even seem to be engaging in a debate about that. And I think there's a video that the New York Times put together that really demonstrates some of the tactics being used to divert our attention away from some of the corruption that DOGE has already unveiled.
If you want to understand what Elon Musk is doing now to the federal government, all you have to do is look at what he did at Twitter.
In October 2022, Elon Musk bought Twitter for $44 billion and molded it in his own image.
He focused on mass layoffs, on reducing real estate footprint, and on pushing employees to resign so that he could cut back on payroll and real estate costs.
Now he's taking those same tactics to the US government.
Just look at the email that the federal government recently sent to its workers.
Can I just say that are we already seeing the use of artificial intelligence avatars in this video? Is that what's going on here? Because there's something very robotically unhuman about this video so far, aside from that little smirk, which itself was weird and seemed like it might have been like an AI hallucinogen.
Offering them a buyout to leave the government.
Fork in the road. Type the word resign. This is from Office of Personnel Management with help from DOGE, I suppose.
It echoed a similar message that Elon Musk sent to Twitter employees in November 2022 with the exact same subject line.
Musk uses an approach to his businesses called zero-based budgeting. He's now started to use that tactic in government and say basically government spending needs to come down to zero and line items need to be added back one at a time.
Now, one thing you should know about that is that sounds like rationality, right? Okay, let's look at what we're going to do and spend the things based on what we need to do. When we hear about things like, I've cut the deficit, like when President Biden said, I've cut the deficit, or when the Congressional Budget Office talks about budget cuts and deficit cuts, or austerity, one of the things that they're doing is something diametrically opposed from zero-based budgeting. They assume budget growth. And any cut in the growth of the projected spending is called a cut and called austerity. This is a linguistic trick that has been used on we the people for decades to try to make us feel like any attempt to rein in out of control government spending is somehow ushering in the collapse of the government. If we only spend 10% more this year than last year, that's considered a cut if we were going to spend 15% more. Again, I welcome the idea of starting from zero and looking at what we should do and not do from there.
And some of the same people that Elon Musk used during his Twitter takeover are now being deployed to help cut costs at the federal level. So it's worth asking, how successful were Elon Musk's tactics in reducing costs at Twitter?
Now, just remember that question. How successful were Elon Musk's tactics at reducing costs? Because this is where you're going to see some really serious propaganda wordsmithing put to action.
While he's cut costs in slashing back budgets, in reducing headcount by around 80% of people, corresponding revenue has also gone down.
Wait, what now? So we've switched to revenue. We've switched from the cost side to the revenue side. Did you see that? That little flip? Oh, no. He cut costs by 80%. But revenue's gone down. Let's start talking about revenue now. So implicit in here is that Elon radically succeeded. Twitter still operates. Twitter's actually been adding features at a faster rate since Elon took over, including integrating AI and all kinds of crazy stuff. But that gets ignored, or that goes unsaid.
Its valuation per investors has declined significantly from the $44 billion that Musk paid for the company in 2022. And what happened to those who were laid off is that they were denied some of the severance that they were owed, and they're now suing to recoup that money.
So this all begs the question, should the federal government be treated like a private company?
I mean, if we want to work in balance, we should probably get closer to that. I think maybe we should be at least more like a private company that has to live within its means than we are.
The federal government doesn't have shareholders. It's not operated necessarily at a profit, but there are constituents, and those constituents rely on the services like Medicare or Social Security on a day-to-day basis.
You often see Musk portray himself as someone with a big mission, that he needs to save humanity by going to Mars. He needs to save free speech by taking over Twitter. He needs to save America by dismantling the federal government.
This was a fork in the road of human civilization.
But very little concern or care for the individual workers who are sort of getting caught in the grist of these takeovers.
So you see what the New York Times is doing there? Can Elon do it? Oh, I guess he can. Now let's talk about unrelated things to the question we ourselves have asked. This is one of the reasons why I don't think we hate the corporate press enough. This is supposed to be the high end of journalism, and given it's a TikTok video, but it belies a complete lack of honest dealing when it comes to these issues. And it also suggests a lack of understanding of relatively recent American history, because you don't have to go that far back for the shoe to be on the other party foot when it comes to things like DOGE.
Thank you. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. President, if you want to know why government doesn't work, look behind you. The answer is at least partly on those forklifts.
I mean, look at Bill Clinton. Look, they're laughing about how the government sucks. Oh man, yeah, totally right. Yeah, it's horrible. That's a laugh line for me. I mean, these two guys would be ultra MAGA Republicans in 2025.
Those forklifts hold copies of budget rules, procurement rules, and the personnel code. The personnel code alone weighs in at over 1,000 pounds. That code and the regulations stacked up there no longer help government work. They hurt it. They hurt it badly. And we recommend getting rid of it.
Radical, absolute radical assault on our democratic norms, right? Where I don't recall the press saying that President Clinton was assaulting our democratic norms by talking about trying to radically restructure the branch of government that he is the executive of.
This report tells us how to cut waste, cut red tape, streamline the bureaucracy, change procurement rules, change the personnel rules, and create a government that works better and costs less. Let me tell you a little bit about what we found. First, some bad news. We found that government really does not work very well in ways that will take a long time to fix.
A long time indeed. That long time might literally be infinity, if we're being honest with ourselves. This trip down memory lane makes me long for the 90s Al Gore, because the 2020s Al Gore is a different animal altogether.
By 600,000 Hiroshima-class atomic bombs exploding every single day on the Earth. That's what's boiling the oceans, creating these atmospheric rivers and the rain bombs.
Okay, I wonder if the current Al Gore has gotten any money from U.S. aid. This isn't new. This concern about bureaucratic bloat and mounting layers of agencies goes all the way back to the Declaration of Independence itself. Among the list of grievances in the Declaration of Independence was this one. He has erected a multitude, he being the king, has erected a multitude of new offices and sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their substance. So being concerned about bureaucracy and bloat and too many government employees getting in the way and messing with us and costing too much money, that's not new. That's not some sudden affront to democratic norms or to the American experience or American history. It is as old as America itself. One criticism being leveled against DOGE and against the Trump administration, which has a point, is that within the executive branch, within these agencies, there's not that much money, not compared to the nearly $7 trillion the federal government spends. And with a deficit, an annual shortfall, roughly around $2 trillion and set to grow over time, this is all just window dressing. This is all tackling the small stuff and not really getting at the hard problems, like the fact that Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security are themselves driving most of our deficit. They are the actual structural elements of our unsustainability at the federal level. I think this criticism misses the mark on a very basic human level. The way I like to think about it is, it's really hard to tackle any big cleanup job. When I go into my garage on a weekend and want to clean the darn thing up, it is overwhelming. And so I have learned to practice the Marie Kondo approach. And I think that is exactly what DOGE is doing. But if you're not familiar, let's have a look.
They have so much stuff.
It's a never-ending battle to fight the clutter.
Hello, I'm Maria Kondo. 私のミッションは片付けによって世界をときめかせていくことです。Let's start tidying.
This girl's no joke. This is amazing. We have too much stuff.
We have too much stuff. We're spending too much money. The best thing about what DOGE is doing is it's going through the closets, going through the drawers in your garage, taking all of the stuff out, putting it on the bed, on the floor, and trying to figure out what of this is worth keeping. It's actually pretty great to start small and work your way up. On a personal level, when we do this, it's like you get little wins along the way. And I think, that's the spark joy. And for me, I'm not going to get to the whole garage. If I try, all I do is get confused or become despondent in all my trash. But if I just take that one drawer out, take care of it, return it to something that looks orderly, I feel like, okay, now I can take on the next one. And, while I'm listening to a Jordan Peterson or whatever, before you know it, I am on the right track. And that's how I see what's going on with DOGE. They're going agency by agency of the executive branch, opening it up, looking what's inside, looking at how it's being handled, maybe for the first time in the past 25 years. So I'm super excited about that. I think that should be celebrated. And the fact that Elon knows how to go back to first principles, fire people that aren't necessary so they can go do something productive instead of basically living off the taxpayer, that's all great. This is kind of like the closest we're probably going to get to having a Javier Milei for America.
Ministerio de Turismo y Deporte, afuera. Ministerio de Cultura, afuera. Ministerio de Ambiente y Desarrollo Sostenible, afuera. Ministerio de las Mujeres y Género y Diversidad, afuera. Ministerio de Obras Públicas, afuera, aunque te resistas.
He's the best. What's wrong with this? Aside from it maybe not being able to solve the deficit problem in totality, although it can probably make a bigger dent than most people think. Some measures are already suggesting there's at least $500 billion. That would be a 25% reduction in the deficit. It could be up to $1 trillion or more. It won't close the gap. Bigger reforms by the Congress are going to be essential. But it's heading in the right direction, and I didn't expect to see this, to be perfectly honest. The first Trump administration was not big on cutting spending. They increased spending, they increased the deficit. We have to be clear-eyed about that. But there is a deeper critique, a constitutional critique, and I think it's worth taking it seriously.
Elon Musk says President Donald Trump has agreed that the U.S. Agency for International Development should be shut down. Staffers have been told to stay out of the Washington headquarters, and many report being locked out of the agency's computer systems. Musk says the agency is, quote, beyond repair. He, Trump, and some Republican lawmakers have accused it of promoting liberal causes.
And just go on Twitter and see some of the outrageous stuff that's being done by USAID. Many other people that have looked into this more carefully than I have noted that this agency is more or less a cutout for entanglements and the pushing of our ideology on other countries, which is often pretty gross. So I don't really think American taxpayer dollars should be going towards promoting trans activism in the third world. That's getting a little too close to proving the Islamic critique of America that we are the great Satan. Correct. For me. So thumbs down on a lot of what's being done by US aid. It's not really aid at all. Even the naming is sort of a shell game to try to make us think that it's all humanitarian when most of it is really foreign interventionism that the founders would have found abhorrent mostly.
We talked about Trump wanting to be a dictator on day one, and here we are. This is what the beginning of dictatorship looks like.
I don't know what the purpose of the Democratic Party is. We should have two parties that are good, right? We should have an opposition that doesn't immediately go to Hitler every single time. It's not good for our democratic norms to have such a non-functional opposition party in the Democrats. I am not a Democrat. I don't like what the Democrats stand for, but I do want them to actually be functional. And this rhetoric, it didn't work in the election. It hasn't worked for the past several years. It's hyperbolic and stupid and doesn't work. So it's just divisive nonsense.
Elon Musk, you didn't create U.S. aid. The United States Congress did for the American people.
Was it for the American people or was it for foreign aid to other people paid for by the American people? I'm a little confused on this claim.
And just like Elon Musk did not create U.S. aid, he doesn't have the power to destroy it. And who's going to stop him? We are. We're going to stop him. This illegal, unconstitutional interference with congressional power is threatening lives all over the world.
They don't have the right to be disciplining people for political reasons, and they don't have a right to usurp Congress's rightful role to appropriate money. We've appropriated money for U.S. aid to render service around the world in fighting disease and fighting corruption, in defending democracy. We know Elon Musk is not interested in that. Donald Trump is not interested in that. But that's what the American Congress has done, and we're going to stand up with the workers here.
I don't agree with that agency either. I don't think America is charged with defending democracy in other countries or doing any of that. The American people are actually, by a large margin, as a people, individually, the most charitable people on this planet. We don't elect a government to do charity on our behalf, or I don't believe we should, and I don't believe the Constitution sets that out as an enumerated power of the Congress. But one thing that Representative Raskin does get right is that the Congress is, or was designed to be, the powerful body of the government. In preparing to talk about this stuff today, I went and grabbed a little pocket constitution and read Articles 1, 2, and 3, which create the Congress, the president, and the Supreme Court. The actual Constitution itself, with all of the amendments, is only this much of this book. It's not even, this is a tiny little book, and the whole Constitution and all of the amendments to it are just a small percentage. In a certain sense, there's only one sentence devoted to the president's power as it is related to something like operating USAID, which is housed in the executive branch. It is the president's job to run this stuff. And that line goes, "He shall take care that the laws be faithfully executed and shall commission all the officers of the United States." So I think the criticism here that President Trump, by pausing the spending being done by these agencies, that he might not be faithfully executing the law as written, is worth taking seriously. It's worth taking seriously. Just because I don't like it, just because I think USAID is a weird CIA screw job that's trying to manipulate the world for nefarious ends and fund people with ideas I despise, that doesn't mean I get to elect somebody who can ignore the law, if that's the law. That's problem number one. And I think we have to take that seriously. I do want us as a people to be a republic, to be a nation of laws. Because even if I personally like what Donald Trump is doing, I didn't like what Joe Biden was doing. And he was ignoring the limits on his powers all the time, such as mandating people to get vaccinated. There is no authority for the president to do so. There's no authority for the Congress to do so either, for that matter. Let's look at the Congress. So the Congress has what's called enumerated powers. In fact, this premise is deeply embedded in our constitutional structure, that our government, as created by the Constitution, has specific powers that are enumerated. When it comes to these things that aren't explicitly listed in here, they end up falling in to a fairly narrow phrase, and this is from Article 1 of the Constitution, Section 8. To make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers, and all other powers vested by this Constitution in the government of the United States. The necessary and proper clause. The rest here, I didn't see economic development for the third world, or promoting democracy abroad, or running our schools, or operating insurance programs. There's a whole lot of stuff that sure stretches credibility as a reading of this. Of course, that is the subject of all of American history's legal battles and precedents. I don't expect that I, or you, dear viewer, are going to know quite how to navigate that. But I do want to narrow in on one piece of the puzzle here, because if the Constitution sets forth that the Congress is empowered to write the laws of the land, and that the president is really just supposed to faithfully execute those, for a very long time, we have, as Elon Musk noted, lived in this netherworld where this fourth branch of government, these administrative agencies, have been given the power to create law and execute law themselves. And that is what so much of the executive branch and the federal government now does.
Administrative agencies, theoretically, are all part of the executive branch of government. We've had administrative agencies and executive departments from the very beginning of the Republic, since 1789. And the reason is that the president, who is tasked with faithfully executing the law, cannot possibly faithfully execute the law entirely on his own. The president needs assistance, and to that end, Congress has established departments and agencies to assist the president in executing the law. But fundamentally, under our constitutional scheme of separate powers, agencies are part of the executive branch assisting in the execution of the law. The very first three executive departments were the Departments of Foreign Affairs or State, the Department of War, and the Department of Treasury. So in a sense, administrative agencies have been with us since the very beginning.
And that's really important to know. It is a matter of America's entire history that the Congress grants power to the executive branch and that it exists inside of different departments. But this is where things start to get really weird really fast.
Even though administrative agencies are part of the executive branch of government, there are serious questions as to whether administrative agencies, or at least some of them, are improperly structured in violation of the Constitution's provisions for executive power. For example, when agencies make rules and regulations, they are doing so pursuant to delegations of power from Congress. But are there some things that Congress shouldn't be able to delegate? Questions that are too important that the people's representatives should be the ones to decide those questions? Thus, when agencies make rules and regulations, there is a question as to whether they're exercising legislative power. And legislative power belongs to Congress, not the executive branch. In terms of executive power, the framers explicitly rejected a plural executive in favor of a unitary executive, and they vested all executive power in a single president of the United States. Yet Congress today sometimes creates independent agencies whose officers are insulated from the president's power to supervise, oversee, and remove them. This raises questions as to whether these independent agencies have recreated a plural executive in violation of the constitutional requirements.
You got to remember the context, right? We escaped the king. We did not want to recreate a king here at home. And so the Constitution was an attempt to constrain government power by setting the three branches against each other, with an assumption that all three would vie for power and that they would check and balance each other's ambitions. That was the premise. That's why, for example, the Senate was originally appointed by state legislatures. It wasn't elected by the public in the states directly. And that meant that the state governments themselves had representatives in the upper house to prevent the federal government from trampling on states' rightful authority. And the 10th Amendment says anything not explicitly enumerated should be left to the states or to the people. We have been operating in what is arguably unconstitutional government when it comes to the way things are set up and built in the federal government for a very long time. But very specifically, when it comes to all these agencies, we have this problem, as this video pointed out, and that is that the Congress has more or less kicked the can to the executive. The law that I think of the most, because it was being debated at the time I first started getting into this, was Obamacare. And some of you might remember what was said about Obamacare by, at that time, Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi.
It's going to be very, very exciting. But we have to pass the bill so that you can find out what is in it away from the fog of the controversy.
Yeah, we have to pass the bill so that you and us, for that matter, can find out what's in it. What does that mean? What that means is modern legislation is a collection, a very long collection, a collection that makes this look as tiny as it is, of wishful thinking and nonsense, of the Department of Health and Human Services shall make magic happen somehow. And we're not sure how, and we're not going to enumerate it in our law, and therefore we're not going to allow the executive branch to execute the law, and therefore we're not going to do our job. Instead, we're just going to say magical happy things, name the bill something pleasant like Affordable Care Act, never mind that care got more expensive in the aftermath, and then let these agencies write the actual law. That entire process is fundamentally antithetical to the way the Constitution sets up the powers of the Congress and the president. It kicks the can into the presidency, and then it leaves the president, who has the authority to run the executive branch, to do whatever he wants, by and large, with all of this power, all of this discretion that the Congress has given him or her. And so the problem here is that this outrage about the abuse of authority—
You have authority over all of them.
I have authority?
That's right.
Yeah, that's right. You do. The president does. The president has an inordinate amount of authority, and the Congress has given that to him. And the Congress likes it that way because then they aren't held accountable for when things go wrong. They just get to pass happy playtime bill, gonna make the world a better place bill, and then kick it to the executive branch. And that's been happening for a long, long time. This is why President Obama said, I have a pen and a phone and I'm willing to use it. Sue me. And that is what President Trump is doing now. Do I like that the president has this much authority? No, I really don't. But our constitutional structure didn't imagine the kind of morass that we would be in. It didn't imagine a world where Congress would set up permanent agencies filled with employees who are given the force of law, who buy bullets, because there's a lot of bullets bought by all of these agencies, including Health and Human Services. Why does Health and Human Services need bullets? I didn't recall bullets ever being used in the hospital. Bullets are pulled out of bodies in the hospital, but live rounds in the hospital? I don't think so. There's something else going on there. And I'm happy, even if it's unconventional, that President Trump is using his executive authority to review all of this with an eye of shrinking it or shutting it down. And we will have to wait to see how this plays out in the courts and how it ultimately manifests in legislation in the Congress. Maybe Congress will do its job. For now, I am not going to hold my breath. And I have only scratched the surface here. We are not yet in a constitutional crisis. We're not. But there is an example that is clearer, that should be a warning, and that I hope isn't a sign of things to come. And that is the ban on TikTok. I personally don't particularly like the ban on TikTok. I think that's part of the censorship industrial complex, even though I don't love the idea of teenagers basically giving all their information to the Chinese communists. But the Congress did pass the ban on TikTok, or I should say, the requirement that TikTok must be sold to an American company in order to remain available to Americans. President Trump did not have the authority to pause the termination of TikTok, because at the point where the law said the deadline is there, if you're not sold, you shut down. That's the law. That is a clear example of the law actually doing what it's supposed to, laying out what should happen, setting the rules of the game. And the executive should faithfully execute the law. And so that means President Trump should, even though I don't want him to do that, have shut down TikTok. I want President Trump to succeed. I think many of you do as well who are here at this channel, but we can't forget what we're fighting for. We can't forget that making America great, greater, great again, starts with understanding what makes America great in the first place. The more we understand that, the more we teach it to our kids, the better off we will be in the future. And that is what I try to do on this channel every day. I hope you appreciate that. I know you'll let me know in the comments below if you don't think so. And I'm looking forward to seeing what you have to say. And once again, if you like what we're doing here, head to dadssavesamerica.com and subscribe. If you love what we're doing, head there and make a donation, because that's how we keep things going. And have a great weekend.